History's strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
Long before there was Wikipedia, there was Grandpa. Loved my grandpa. Only got to know one of them. I never got to know my other grandpa. My grandpa was full of stories, and he could talk to you for hours about things that maybe interested me, maybe didn't. But there was Grandpa. And if you dared to correct him, as I once did, well, you could end up getting written out of the will. Grandpa didn't have one, but there you go. This idea of communication, the way it used to be, the way it is now, is intriguing to me. We're laying the groundwork here for what we're going to get into next week. Next week, we're going to start on Bill Mick Live. Dave Does History. We're going to start Liberty 250, this Constitution Thursday of the Declaration of Independence, where we're going to go through the Declaration of Independence. We're going to talk about some ideas. We're going to talk about anything you can imagine with the Declaration of Independence. We were supposed to start this today, but stuff happens, folks, and I just couldn't do it. So there you go. But we're going to lay the groundwork today to talk about the first episode of that. In the first episode of that, we're going to talk about the meaning of words and how those meanings have shifted. And it's important to understand that, because I think that the reason that those meanings have shifted, and one of the things I will say to you, is because of the difference between an oral tradition of history and a written tradition of history. Now, you may say to yourself, but Dave, written is far superior. I mean, it's facts. I mean, why do you have all those books on your shelves if written doesn't work? Well, you're right up to a point. The problem with written history is that it's static. It's sterile. It loses something in translation. What do I mean? Let's talk about, for just a moment, the way we communicate today. Here in the United States of America, we have these, our phones. That's my beautiful wife, whom I love, and there you go. And we text one another because, frankly, she won't answer the phone, so we send texts back and forth. I text Bill all the time. I text Friar Rod all the time. We have these texting things that we use, and we text with people. And indeed, we've reached a point in society now where it's almost rude to actually call someone. I don't answer the phone. I don't know about you, but I don't answer it. You want to talk to me, text me. That's why I have a text line, 209-565-DAVE. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice here. But when we shifted to this texting thing, we ran into a problem, didn't we? And it wasn't unlike when we started writing letters to one another. The problem that we ran into was we would say things like, sure, but that doesn't carry the same connotation in a text as it does when I look at you and shrug and roll my eyes or whatever. And so we had to start adding emojis, what they call initializations, LOL, LMAFO, or LMFAO, those kind of things. We had to start putting those things in there so that people would know, JK, so that people would know we were just kidding. It was a joke. We have the same problem with email. We have emails where people send an email and it's like, is that the tone that you really take? Is that really what you mean? And we have these discussions about what does it really mean when you say in an email, with all due respect, are you actually calling that person a moron? I mean, that's what it sounds like. Is that what you meant? Written forms of communication struggle to convey tone and emotion. Thumbs up. Hey, what does that mean? Does it mean great? Or does it mean Geez, you're an idiot. I hope you drive into a ditch. Depending on the context, of course. And what happens once we're all gone? What happens in 1,000 years when we don't use this stuff anymore and people are trying to figure out what we were talking about back then? What does that mean? What about this gesture, Because is that racist? Is it not racist? Written communication is flattened. It loses context. It loses translation in the sense of we don't get the tone. Oral communication relies on that tone. It relies on facial expression. It relies on rhythm, repetition. It's why in some ways radio is so great. Podcasting is so great. I argue with my consultant all the time. Dave, you got to do video. Why? Listen to what I'm saying. And it's like reading a book. When you open a book and you read a page in a book, do you realize that when you read the same page I read, in your head, you see something entirely different than what I see? Because the context and text is different. But when you listen to my voice, when you listen to Bill's voice, when you listen to Rod's voice, when you listen to somebody speaking, you all kind of get to the same conclusion. In 400 years, somebody's watching a TikTok dance. Are they going to look at that like, well, this has deep meaning, like a Shakespearean sonnet? Or will they just have to guess, what does it mean? Like we do with cave paintings. You see, the two forms of communication don't really match up, do they? Now, one of the areas in my own life where this really comes into play is, most of you know I'm Jewish. And in Judaism, we have what we call the oral law, the oral tradition, versus the written law, the Torah. We have these two different things because one is written down and one was orally transmitted to us. In fact, for many, many years, for most of Jewish history, in fact, sorry, I had to move a piece of paper. Sorry. For most of Jewish history, it was forbidden to write down the things that were oral, the oral tradition. And it was forbidden to read aloud the things that were written down, the Torah. You didn't go into the service and read the Torah. You heard the oral tradition and you read for yourself the Torah. There was centuries for that. There was a very specific reason why they finally started to write it down. But the point was that oral tradition allowed for flexibility, allowed for context, and it allowed for communal development of the meaning. And before you send me the emails going, well, it didn't make sense. Well, again, it's one of those things you need to study to understand. But for way of example, I have here in my hands a set of tefillin, right? These are the things that we put on to pray. Now, if you read the Torah, it says you shall put them on your arms and on your foreheads. But it doesn't tell you what they're supposed to look like, nor does it tell you where they're supposed to go. Those things came to us from the oral tradition. As they began to write this down, they wrote it down because they were afraid of losing it, and there were some reasons for that. Many of them have to do with pogroms and things like the Holocaust and those sorts of things. They began to write this down, and really, the Talmud, which is the oral tradition, it's like a group chat between rabbis from different centuries, arguing with each other and people who are already dead. It can be very confusing. It can be very frustrating. But it's something that almost defies comprehension and understanding, because now it's written and you don't get to see the rabbis themselves doing the rabbi thing. You don't get to hear them. You don't get to feel them. Some years ago, there is a comedian. He's not dead. A guy by the name of Eddie Izzard. Maybe you know him, maybe you don't. Eddie Izzard is a famous British comedian. He was famous. He's been in the Ocean's movies, Ocean's 12, Ocean's 13. Plays the really super smart computer guy. But he's famous for his stand-up routine. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about his stand-up routine. His stand-up routine is that he is a transvestite. He's not gay. He's not transgender. He's just a bloke who likes to wear makeup and women's clothes. Trust me, it's funny in context. It's hard to explain the context to people that aren't there. In the middle of one of his shows, I think it's called Dress to Kill, he veers off into this conversation. I was backstage, and I saw a news report about Engelbert Humperdinck. Now, you younger folk aren't going to know who Engelbert Humperdinck was. Some of your older folk might say to me, well, he was a German composer in the 1800s. He composed the opera for Hansel and Gretel, which is true. He did. He was also a pop singer in the 60s and 70s who didn't like his own stage, didn't like his name, and like so many people, he took a stage name, and Engelbert Humperdinck worked. And so he was a singer. And Eddie Izzard comes out on the stage and he says, so I was backstage and I saw a news flash that Engelbert Humperdinck has died. And there's this, in the audience, this kind of gasp from people who know that he was a singer 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, but they're not really familiar with his work. They couldn't tell you 2 songs the guy sang. But they know their parents liked him, and so they go, ooh. And then he says, no, I'm just kidding. I just made that up. Now, me telling you that isn't funny. But if you watch him do that, and you listen to him do that, you get an entirely different story. Because his gestures and his eyes, and he does this thing with his eyebrows where he goes, no, I made that up. And then he bounces his eyebrows like, no, I didn't make that up. He really is dead. No, I'm serious. He's fine. No, he really is dead. No, I made that up. And by the time 5 minutes passes of him talking about Engelbert Humperdinck maybe being dead or maybe not being dead, you have no idea. And even in the 21st century, I wasn't willing to look down at my phone and go, is Engelbert Humperdinck dead or not? And I didn't even want to ask Alexa. I didn't care. It was just bemusing to me the way he was using oral communication to confuse the living daylights out of me. If I was reading it, I wouldn't have known one way or the other. I wouldn't have cared. But the body language, the gestures, the tone, the manipulation of language was a performance. And history is like that. History can be a performance until we write it down. Once we write it down, it's locked into place. And we can hand it to a bored high schooler, but we have no way of knowing what the context, what the feeling of that moment was. And watching Eddie Izzard do that routine, you're laughing because really, Engelbert Humperdinck is a funny name. Humperdinck. And maybe you know who he was, maybe you don't. Or is, because he may not be dead. I don't know. I've never actually looked it up. I guess maybe I should. Sure he is. He was pretty old when I was a kid. So the bottom line is, it was that way of taking language and inflecting it, infusing it with confusion that changed the tone of what he was doing. Meaning of words dies in black and white. As soon as we write it down, it's static. When we write down something that should be said, even in the Talmud, it becomes locked in place and it loses something, which is one of the reasons why when Jews study Talmud particularly, we like to argue, because that gives us that sense back of, is that absolutely what you mean? LOL? Question mark, question mark? Paren sigh, close paren. History is not just what happened. I've said this before, I will continue to say this, history is editorial. It absolutely is editorial. You cannot possibly write down everything that happened. You cannot write down every thought that every person involved had. You can't even know who all was involved. Think about one incident in history. Think about, I don't know, pick one. The Apollo 13 disaster. Right? What's the name of the individual that was operating the crane when the oxygen tank fell? Anybody know? You can't possibly write down everything. You can't possibly know everything that happened. And so you have to editorialize. You have to decide, okay, this is what we're going to include. This is what we're not going to include. This person wrote why they did that. It's what drives me nuts about my great-grandfather. I desperately want to know from my great-grandfather why he did what he did. What did he do, Dave? Well, in the summer of 1862, my great-grandfather walked from Ashdown County, Arkansas, southwest corner, Texarkana, that basic area of Texas and Arkansas. He walked from there to Rolla, Missouri, where he joined the Union Army. Arkansas is a Confederate state. He was from the southernmost part of one of these southern states. He walked to Missouri in the summer heat of 1862, joined the Union Army. Now, I know why he did. The broadest of sense, right back there on that shelf, right in that area there, are two books about Arkansas's damned Yankees. And it talks about what motivated them to do what they did. So in the broadest sense, sure, it's written down and I know, okay, this is what they generally thought. But I don't know that from my own great-grandfather. I've not heard those words from him. I've not heard his voice. I've not seen his eyes. I've not felt that passion from him. And so while it's history, it's editorialized down to, okay, this is probably why he did it. I just want to know for sure. When we tackle concepts, when we take on ideas, next week on Bill Mick Live, Dave Does History, we're going to start this series on Liberty 250. We're going to start this celebration of the Declaration of Independence. Talk about a document that is locked in place. You know the words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. To us, that has a certain connotation, a certain feel. But what about Charles Holt? When he first heard those words in 1776, what did he think? What did he feel? Because he heard them, they were read to him. What about Martha Radcliffe? What about Benjamin Franklin? John Adams? When they first heard did it sound different to them? We're going to talk about those kinds of words and those kinds of concepts, and we're going to talk about two words in particular. We're going to talk about the word freedom and the word liberty, which today, to us, to our ears, to our writings, are synonymous. But believe me, in 1775, 1776, it was very important to use the correct term. And if you said freedom when you meant liberty, you would have been corrected. How do we know? Because people did. It's written down. And we can read their discussion. Nah, dude, we weren't fighting for freedom. say dude. They should have, but they didn't. They didn't say we were fighting for freedom. They made a point of saying, you need to understand what we were fighting for was liberty, not freedom. We already had that. We didn't have liberty. So clearly there's a difference in the meaning of the two words, isn't there? At least there was. And why did we lose that meaning? I think we lost it because we started writing it down and we lost that emotional, that oral, that not so tactile attraction to that word, connection to that word. We don't feel what those people felt, what they portrayed when they said that word, liberty. It has a much deeper meaning to them than it does today. And that's why our politicians don't use it. In some cultures, there is deep suspicion of the written word because the transference of ideas to writing robs them of their ultimate meaning because it deprives the word of gestures and emotions that lie underneath them. And that's where we're going to start next week. We're going to start with that word, liberty. And we're going to pull that word apart, and we're going to find out why it was so important to the people who were there that they were willing to risk everything they had for liberty, not freedom. While our politicians today, while our speechwriters today, while our dictionaries today might tell us that the words are the same, they have the same meaning. The problem is that liberty has come to mean freedom in our lexicon. But freedom has not come to mean liberty. And we're going to pull that apart. And we're going to start applying that to our understanding. Because believe me, when you understand the meaning of the word liberty, those words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, take on a much deeper and much more fulfilling, much more American ideal.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.